Well, at the risk of stating the obvious, how's that for a driver who's about to get sacked by his team? Carlos Sainz, absolutely superb for Scuderia Ferrari around the Autódromo Hermanos Rodriguez in Mexico. A packed Autódromo, you gotta say. Most of the crowd probably there to support their countryman Sergio Perez, but he didn't make it out of Q1. So who else to support? What about the Spaniard in the red Ferrari? Just brilliant. Carlos Sainz made the point as he crossed the line. They said, great lap, Carlos, great lap. He said, no, two. And he was absolutely right, because his first run was a 16.0. Then he did a 15.9. Nothing nicer than getting under some sort of barrier like that. The only driver to do it, 15.9. But as he said, that 16.0 would have been good enough for the pole as well. So 2 laps, good enough for the pole. 2 laps quicker than his teammate, Charles Leclerc. Very important point, of course. And I think if you look at the results, if you look at Carlos Sainz ahead of Charles Leclerc, if you look at Lando Norris without Oscar Piastri to pressure him, but nonetheless only P3 in what is still a very, very good McLaren. I'm not decrying his lap in any way, but a little bit of a surprise that Lando wasn't there, bearing in mind Oscar Piastri was so quick in FP3 as well. We'll get on to that in a minute. He was quickest in FP3, but Lando only 3rd, and then George Russell ahead of Lewis Hamilton. You have to wonder whether or not it does have an effect, this business of the rookies getting into the race drivers' cars in FP1 in Mexico, because Charles Leclerc could look back at qualifying and say, well, you know, I didn't do that FP1 and I needed that seat time. It's a really, really difficult lap. As it was, Charles did lose a lap in qualifying to track limits and had to perform under pressure. Carlos Sainz, no issues like that whatsoever. And George Russell always had the edge over Lewis Hamilton, even though George, of course, had that big shunt in FP2 yesterday and the mechanics had to work through the curfew. They're allowed to do that only twice a year, but no problem for the mechanics. Did a very good job rebuilding the car. And again, George slightly quicker than Lewis, and Lewis making a mistake right at the end of his qualifying lap in the final sector in one of the twiddly bits. Very unlike Lewis to do that sort of thing. So I just make the point, seat time is critical, and it has that effect. And I think also it had the adverse effect on Oscar Piastri, because there's nothing better being in a great team, being in a great car, and being the only one of the 2 drivers out in FP1, getting all the groundwork done. Admittedly, the McLaren wasn't very good that day, but he was very quick in FP3 and Oscar Piastri P1. And I wonder whether he took that dose of overconfidence perhaps into qualifying. Bear in mind also McLaren, because they were so confident, like Ferrari and Mercedes, ran medium tyres in their first run in Q1. So it was out on mediums and then switching with 3 minutes to go at the end of Q1 effectively onto the soft tyres. And that's where Oscar Piastri made mistakes. And he made mistakes, and it's weird. We're getting kind of sidetracked from the beauty of Carlos Sainz's day, but he made the mistake at turn 12. Interesting how turn 12 again comes into the news, isn't it? Turn 12 in Mexico now, which is the 90-degree right-hander at the end of the back straight that takes you into the stadium. A relatively innocuous corner, a little bit like the last corner in China, actually, that left-hander, except it's a right-hander, of course. And surprising number of errors there. And I suspect it's because the S's before that, leading onto that back straight, are so dramatic. Almost up there in sort of Suzuka territory. If you get them absolutely right, boom, 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 then it's a feeling of, for sure it's a feeling of adrenaline. And you go and you think, right, this is this last really difficult corner, because after that it's all just, wiggle woggle. And I'll brake as late as possible and get the power on as soon as possible. And we saw Yuki Tsunoda go off there in Q2. We saw Nico Hülkenberg lose a lap there, and that's where Oscar Piastri lost his lap. He'd had a track deleted initially on his first run. It wasn't a quick lap anyway, surprisingly enough. It wouldn't have been enough to get him into the top 15, but nonetheless he'd had that. So he was under pressure, and he was out there on the new set of soft tyres, and he just ran over the curb, and it's a very high curb there, and it lifts the car off the ground. You basically lose traction, lose the front, lose the traction, and you just skate along across the curb, and your lap is gone. It's a good curb in that respect, because it does penalise errors. And I should also make the point that I think they did a very good job with track limits in Mexico, turns 2 and 3. Apex, use of apex. We don't see that very often. It's usually running out of road, coming out of a particular corner. But here it's cutting the apex, and they did a really good policing job on that. So full marks to the FIA, Mexico, whoever, who were policing that. Excellent. That's what caught Charles Leclerc out. It caught Max Verstappen out on his first run in Q3 as well. So a lot of, but I'm getting ahead of myself because there's so much going on. Let's go back to Carlos Sainz, because as I've said before, and I've said in live streams, I've said many times, I can't imagine how difficult this year is for Carlos, and how it will continue to be difficult as well from Ferrari's point of view and from the mechanics' point of view around Carlos's car, working on Carlos's car. They're still giving it 100%, as Carlos is, quite obviously. But he knows he's leaving the team at the end of the year. For what reason? Only because they think there's another driver out there they want who's better, and he can't get involved in that. And of course, Sir Lewis Hamilton is a 7 times world champion, and he's going to bring a lot of other qualities to Ferrari, and that's not up for discussion. What is up for discussion is why they decided they need to do that to replace Carlos Sainz. It was a perfect teammate with Charles Leclerc. You can almost argue now Charles Leclerc's a perfect teammate for Carlos Sainz. I mean, what a lap, what a drive. And he built on that seat time in FP1 from the minute he was out on track in Mexico on Friday morning, knowing that Oliver Bowman was in the other car. And here was an opportunity finally to get a little bit of an edge over Charles. Carlos was just absolutely faultless and super, super quick. And the car was good. Yeah, of course the car is good. It's quickest in a straight line through the trap today. Very good, obviously, through the Sector 1. Sector 2, as we saw with Charles Leclerc losing the back end on his quickest lap in Q3, his last lap in Q3, losing the back end. Carlos absolutely perfect through there as well. And I guess, it's part of it is just the way he drives. He's just softened up those open entries that he has. He's softened up the turn in initially. He's still taking quite wide entries compared with Charles, generally speaking. But he's softened it up. And this started midway through last year, at least, if not a little bit before that. And no mistakes, no adrenaline rushes, going into 12, having got that bit exactly right. And then very good through the last sector. He was actually purple in Sector 3 as well. So think about that. Ferrari quickest in Sector 1, but they were quickest through the trap, 350 kilometers an hour. But also Carlos Sainz quickest in Sector 3, which is very tight corners, slow speed turn-in, traction, braking, high-speed braking. Very impressive, really impressive. I just can't say any more than that. Just really good. And such a shame he's leaving Ferrari at the end of the year. Such a shame. Because he's the perfect driver for Ferrari. That's it. Anyway, banged on about that enough. Max Verstappen, I thought, was just brilliant throughout the weekend. If you, I've used the yardstick of FP1 and the drivers that had to sit out that session, Lando and Lewis being perfect examples along with Charles Leclerc. But Max Verstappen had a different thing. It was, this car is still not that easy to drive. And look at Sergio Perez in front of his home crowd on a circuit where the car should be half reasonable. He should at least get into Q3. He didn't get out of Q1. Complaining about, and I don't really understand what he's on about, complaining about braking. He couldn't get the car stopped. Too much energy going through the tyres and brakes. And I'm still trying to think about what that actually means. I suppose he means everything's just running too hot and he couldn't get the retardation through the pedal that he needed. Red Bull have done a lot of work, or did a lot of work, going into Mexico on brake cooling. And if that was an issue, you would imagine it would be showing up on Max's car as well. So it's very odd that that's what Perez is pinpointing. And I can't imagine there's something very specific on his car that's different in that area from Max. It reminds me almost of going back to the Australian Grand Prix when Perez was so hopeless under braking there as well. And I said then, I thought looking back post Miami that maybe there was this asymmetric braking valve thing they've taken off the car, and that's why Perez couldn't drive it. Maybe they've got the car pretty much sorted for Max now in terms of being able to turn in on the brakes the way he does. And Perez is kind of lost still on that, in that area, in that one area. It's very strange for him to be that slow compared with Max on a circuit where he should get at least a couple of tenths from the crowd, you would have thought. So, yeah, but anyway, that just shows how this was not an easy car and how Max continued to work head down on that car. Bearing in mind, he didn't really do any running at all in FP2 yesterday due to that power unit change. And he alone, really. I mean, look who did the long runs this morning in FP3. Max went out very early on soft tyres, did a time. It wasn't that quick. He was ended up about P5, P6. but because he was just desperate to get fuel in the car and go out and do some long runs. And that's what he did. Look at that. The only one, I mean, I haven't got Ferrari in there, I haven't got McLaren in there, because they didn't do any long runs. They're all focusing on doing the quick laps. Yeah, Mercedes did a few. Kevin Magnussen did 3. And look at Max. 22.0, 22.1, 25.3, 21.8, 22.1, 22.3, 22.4. That's a lot of fuel in that car. And that may well come back in spades to help him in the race. That homework, that sort of dedication, even though the car's still not very good. And he was saying on the radio, it got no grip at the rear. You know, no grip at the rear. It's all relative, of course, because it doesn't really look that way. You saw the odd little squirm from Max, but he covers it so well that you couldn't really say, watching from the outside, oh, he's got no grip at all. While we're on that, let's just have a look at how the speed trap looked in FP3, because this was a sign of where we were going, I think. And there you see Ferrari 349. Yeah, they were doing 350 in qualifying. The Mercedes was still quick. Red Bull found a bit of speed in top speed, that's for sure, as did McLaren. McLaren are not far away, a couple of clicks now away from Red Bull, who are almost there with Mercedes. So it's going to be a much tighter top speed battle tomorrow. But it's still an important thing that Max has got the front row of the grid with Lando behind him. That's where he wants Lando, because he, Max Verstappen, is in the lead of the World Championship by 57 points. Lando's now got the pressure to have to try to get past Max. And of course, Max can make mistakes. Things could happen in the race tomorrow, reliability, etc. But all things being equal, the pressure now is on Lando to get ahead of Max Verstappen. He's got to try and beat him tomorrow. And that run down to the first corner, Red Bull have got a slight top speed advantage over McLaren. Don't forget there's no DRS for the first few laps of the race. And so that's exactly what Max needed to do, and did that time under pressure, as I say, having lost his lap time. So Lando third, Charles Leclerc fourth. Charles lost it, as I say, going through Charles lost the back end going through the S's. Beautiful recovery. I mean, we've had Alex Albon, George Russell, both had big shunts with the back end getting away from them. We've had other big moments. Liam Lawson had a moment there as well yesterday. And Charles held that beautifully and still kept the lap together enough to be P4, because there was pressure on him. But of course, that meant that having had that problem, he was then a little bit cautious going through Sector 3, which is one of the reasons, I guess, that Carlos was so good in terms of looking at the results through Sector 3, because Charles then had to protect the lap and make sure he got the lap, which he did, and he was P4, but he will not be happy at all. And as I say, I think he'll look back, and he'll say it privately probably, or maybe he'll say it to Fred, you know, this whole business of sitting out the session at a critical point like this and is not good. And he'll say, well, is it that critical? You know, the championship in the balance, Charles. Yeah, but, you know, the last thing he needs is to be blown away by Carlos Sainz. That's his real point, of course. So George Russell 16.3, Lewis 16.7, making that mistake. Getting a reaction from Toto Wolff. Like, you know, like, what is he doing? Didn't look very good on TV. It looked like, you know, what is Lewis doing? I think what Toto was actually thinking was, you know, we had a car that was a little bit quicker than that. I don't think he was actually condemning Lewis for making a mistake. But that's how it came over. And it was a little bit unfortunate, I think. Kevin Magnussen, very good, 16.8. Wow. Almost there with the Mercedes and the Haas Ferrari. Just getting better and better all the time, aren't they? And Nico Hülkenberg, as I say, just is P10 and lost his time out of the dreaded turn 12, getting on the curbs there. Pierre Gasly, outstanding. I've often talked about Pierre, how quick he is, and wouldn't it be nice to see him in a really decent team, decent car? No offence, Ollie Oakes, but you know what I mean. And he did that. You know, he was always there, always quick, all weekend, Pierre Gasly, and just outstandingly good, really, given what he's driving. Alex Albon, yeah, a little bit disappointing. He's a little bit quicker than that going into Q3. Q2, very, very good. And so let's also, it's being the knockout qualifying, let's have a look at some of the people who didn't get through. Colapinto, disappointed not to get out of Q1. He had a brake lock-up, just turn 4 it was, a little bit of an error creeping in there. Oscar Piastri, we've talked about a little bit of overconfidence, I think, in just not overconfidence. He was super confident, let's put it that way, after being so good in FP3 today. And he was already thinking, potential Grand Prix win coming up, I guess. And then a couple of mistakes, just over driving on the mediums and then on the soft tyre. Again, that weird turn 12 thing of just trying too hard. It's not a corner where you can actually make up a lot of time. It's just one of these corners where you can lose a massive amount of time. I say it's not a corner where you can make a lot of time because everybody brakes late there, and there's a moment beyond which you just can't brake, otherwise you're going to have a lock-up. So you just need to find that point. It's like that end of the back straight in Barcelona, a little bit like that. And then after 12, it's not that long a straight. So even if you don't have a great exit, and even if you haven't been mega quick through the corner, you're not going to lose that much time. You're still going to be hard on the power going into 13. So yeah, a bit of an error there from, well, a huge error from Oscar Piastri, and from McLaren's point of view, calamitous. I say, going back to Lando now, I'm a little bit all over the place because, yeah, it's quite late as well. But just the other point is that Lando should have, the minute that happened, that should have lifted Lando, because all of a sudden he didn't have to think about Oscar Piastri anymore, and qualifying for him was about getting in the perfect lap and probably in a car quick enough to beat the Ferraris and the Red Bulls, and he didn't do that. And I'm a bit surprised by that, and I can only say I think that can be traced back also to Friday morning and not running in FP1. And I still think McLaren should have made Piastri sit out FP1. I know that they were taking it in turns and it was his turn, all that stuff, but I think they should have said, right, given the state of everything, that's what we should have done. That's what I would have done anyway. And who else didn't get out of Ocon? Zoe didn't get out of Q1, Q2. Yuki Tsunoda had that shunt. He would have been about 7th. He was on a good lap, and he was a classic example. The adrenaline was up. He'd got the S's right. He was going to be quick, and he just braked too late and ran off and hit the wall, and that effectively ended at any chance Liam Lawson, his teammate, had of getting into Q3, because they were absolutely, in terms of lap time, the first runs, they'd been within a tenth of one another. So they were right there, and Liam was behind him and hadn't started his lap really, but he would have got through for sure. Aston Martin, absolutely pathetic really, weren't they, given how much money they've got and how much all there is, all the people they've got and everything else. I mean, yeah, Fernando out-qualified Lance Stroll in his 400th Grand Prix start, but I think it's his 400th. I will wait to have Alice Norski confirm that with our proper stats tomorrow. Lance Stroll and Fernando very close to one another, just nowhere really. They were never going to get into Q3. And Valtteri Bottas, who did a good job actually in a car that's still very slow, and it looked like he was always sort of first out of the pits and the first guy doing a quick time. Didn't make it through to Q3, but good job to get into Q2. So there we are, Carlos Sainz on the pole in a car absolutely capable of winning the Grand Prix, and all things being, he's made no mistakes as far as I can see, and Carlos will be. Oh, there was one moment actually when in FP3 this morning when Oscar Piastri said, "Oh, that's typical of Carlos," or something like that. And what had happened was Carlos was going slowly, having done a quick lap. He was going slowly through the S's, Oliver Berman-like, but he was on the left side of the road on this occasion. And you could see what happened. He looks in these mirrors and sees Piastri coming quickly and absolutely does the right thing and moves off track just to give Piastri enough room, to move right off track and just pulls back in front. And what happened was Piastri, the minute he saw Carlos go off track, he was distracted. There was dust or something, I suppose, and lifted. And so when Carlos rejoined, he was very near Piastri. But the reality was Carlos did exactly the right thing, and he got out of the way, and he just assumed Piastri was going to keep going and rejoined, and he was amazed that Piastri had backed off. I think that's what happened. That's what it looked like. And Piastri gets on the radio saying, "Oh, typical Carlos." I would have said, "Wow, that was brilliant reactions from Carlos to get out of the way he did, just to make sure he was completely off track and not blocking Piastri at all." And it just never occurred to him that Piastri was going to come out of the throttle. I think that was the point there. So that was the only real incident involving Carlos Sainz that I could see, and he's just had this absolutely peerless weekend so far. The gravitational forces are behind him, with Charles Leclerc sitting out FP1 and just looking great in the car. And I hope it's an embarrassing thing for Ferrari, from everybody on the pit wall, that they are firing this guy. It is so ridiculous. And yeah, it's very easy to quote people who are saying what I'm saying out of context and say, "Oh, you think that Carlos Sainz is a better driver than Lewis Hamilton." I've never said that in a million years. I've always said, from Lewis's point of view, this is absolutely the right decision, and he's going to go really well at Ferrari. He's going to enjoy the last few years of his career, and it's well earned from his point of view. Yeah, why would he not take it? That is not the point. The point is why they even thought about this in the first place, because they've got this perfect team, and there they are. Of course, Lewis will do a good job, no doubt about that. But Carlos Sainz has done a brilliant job as well, and is still doing a brilliant job. And I think it's a similar thing to the situation at McLaren, which I criticised a long time ago, which was if you've got Daniel Ricciardo in the other car alongside Lando Norris, you don't need Oscar Piastri. Or conversely, if you've got Oscar Piastri, you don't need Lando Norris. They're both super quick, and they're going to end up, as they have done already, massively taking points from one another. And if you look at what McLaren would be like now and how many points Lando would have now, if Daniel Ricciardo was still at McLaren, I think it may not be the 34 points that I've mentioned in my video, but it would be in the region of 25 points for sure if Daniel was still at McLaren. And they'd still be in great shape in the Constructors' Championship. But Lando's points gap to Max would be much less. That's the point. But yeah, but Oscar's a faster driver. We've got to have him. And it's a bit like, Lewis Hamilton, got to have him. Sometimes you have to look at what you've got and don't replace something because you want it. You only replace it if you need to. There's two different things there. It's like people who have 27 different watches. They all work perfectly. Don't actually need 27 watches to tell the time, if you see what I mean. Anyway, there we go. Bit of philosophy at the end of this long night here. It's going to be a good race. It's going to be an amazing drag down to the first corner, I think. Those red cars. Lando wondering what to do about Max. Oh, there's a gap. Shall we go? Oh, yeah, track limits, apex, whatever. Max thinking, yeah, I'll just brake here whenever I want, slow everybody down. Carlos is off my left. I might go down and take the lead. Anything could happen at that first corner. It's a long drag. It's very spectacular. So do not miss it. The Mexican Grand Prix, lap 1, turn 1. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, and to Track Ninja, and of course to you, the viewer, for watching. Can't wait for tomorrow. See you then.